Well, hello everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of Studio 8.1 with me, Jarvis, Todd, and him up there, Paul Skeldon. We've been looking after you and keeping you up to date with all the telemedia news, as it turns out, for 50 episodes. So it's a special occasion for us all. We started this in lockdown. Just as a quick reminder, anybody that's involved in the telemedia industry or anyone that's involved in monetizing mobile subscribers or online subscribers using mobile value-added services, premium content, all the clever billing technology that goes around that, and all the clever platforms that help it be delivered seamlessly to all those wonderful high-tech on-the-move customers. That's what we mean by telemedia. Now, normally, by the way, hello, Paul. How are you, mate?
Hello, mate. I'm good.
Happy anniversary.
Absolutely, yes. Happy 50th, isn't it
50
marvellous?
years,
Who'd have
50
thought that?
episodes. So listen, before we're going to go a little bit off piste this particular episode, because we're going to take a look at where we've been, where we started all those 50 episodes ago. Paul's going to give us a little bit of an insight as to where he thinks we're going. Obviously, we'll be featuring billing technology. We'll be talking about some interesting developments in messaging and content. I've also picked out a few highlights from LinkedIn this week that you probably shouldn't be missing. But before we crack on, why don't we take a little look back, a little trip down memory lane, and just see how we've weathered this particular storm, starting in lockdown. So if Jerry's in the background, here we go.
Oh.
Enjoy. Love that hat. Look at the hair. Leon. James.
Oh, looking young there.
I don't think I've changed a bit.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Get that. Oh, that's a good one. Christmas edition.
Christmas. Oh, that was a good one.
Delane. He hasn't weathered well.
He's not weathered well. That's me on my own. Oh, that's him on my own.
I deserted you there.
Oh, the drinks cabinet.
You can tell Jerry's in Ireland at the moment with the background music.
Oh, there's me in Ireland there.
You're on your own again. That's you. Dawn.
Dawn was there.
Open banking.
Still big topic. Still a big topic.
Well, that was. I hope you enjoyed that. It was pretty indulgent. So for the many thousands of new viewers that we've got today, that won't mean anything. But I promised you that we were going to talk a little bit about the telemedia industry, past, present, and future. So let's crack on. So, without further ado, Paul, great to see you, mate.
Yes.
Thank you very much for putting together an agenda. Normally, we're a bit more structured in terms of specific stories, but since we're celebrating the Big 5-0, what we thought we'd do is take a look at some of the changes that have happened over the past few years and look ahead to where we think the mobile stroke telemedia market is headed. So, mate, firstly, let's take a look backwards and take ourselves back to the dark years of lockdown. Which actually, as it turned out for the telemedia industry, turned out to be something of an opportunity because obviously we've large numbers of potential mobile consumers. That the market was emerging, I think, in terms of customers really looking to consume and buy content, and services of some value. And I think that, the green shoots had been there, but it really kind of turbocharged during lockdown, didn't it? So
it did.
I want to just take you back 4 years. And let's firstly look at how that particular period affected the messaging side of the business. So what
Well, what I've sort of done is I've looked at sort of what kind of some of the. Well, I started off by looking at what did we talk about the first time we did this, and looking at my notes, it was a chaotic and confused agenda of bits and pieces. Though we seemingly pulled it off, and as anyone watching will attest, we've now polished this into a finely honed media machine.
Oh, indeed.
But there were a few stories that we did that were, I think, pertinent to where things have gone. I think the biggest changes that we've seen, or the biggest change we've seen across the lockdown period and into now, is how business messaging, first of all, changed dramatically. We saw in the first one we were talking about some of the movement in that market. We had Digital Virgo buying Docomo Digital, and that was more around sort of marketing and marketing messaging. But I think in lockdown we saw businesses suddenly realizing they were having to communicate with consumers with through WhatsApp, because everyone was WhatsApping each other. And then you remember back to those dark days of lockdown, that sort of WhatsApp and WhatsApp groups and things all sort of sprung up. And it was one of the things that we started to talk about in that first episode, about how business messaging was starting to regain some traction. And I think over the past 50 episodes, it's about 4 years, isn't it? I think we started in June 2020, yeah. I think. Yeah. So it's pretty much almost 4 years. Business messaging has just gone sort of ballistic. And sort of, by now, 2024, March 2024, it looks like there's going to be around 120 billion OTT messages.
Wow.
Sent across sort of the various networks. I couldn't find any consistent figures for SMS, but it's billions. Right. SMS growth is slowing, but it's still growing. It's being used everywhere. It's a sort of fundamental part of A2P sort of messaging. The one-time passcode as sort of, continues to be kind of used all the time, even though there's a lot of talk about how it's open to fraud. SMS has been open up to artificial inflation of traffic and fraud and all sorts of things that we never really saw with it 4 years ago, or in any of the time up to the 2020. So I think one of the sort of fundamental things we've seen is this massive change in business messaging, and of course the rise of CPaaS. We started talking about CPaaS in I think about sort of a couple of episodes in 2020, and you got annoyed about it being another acronym, but here we are 4 years later. It's now actually quite a big part of the telemedia industry, and there are quite a few sort of players who operate it, and there's a big debate as to whether what sort of they're doing with cloud-based stuff is any better or different to those that were running it off servers and all the rest of it. So but more and more mainstream businesses are using SMS, OTT, and CPaaS, which is having a direct impact on all the other things that telemedia does, like carrier billing and all the rest of it. Yeah. So that was like my first, I think, biggest shift that we've seen.
Well, I remember when I was getting quite upset about yet another acronym being introduced into the telemedia language, and the whole kind of AAS as a service acronym, which is now, you can probably put almost any letter of the alphabet in front of the AAS and you'll come up with some definition of a service which is part of the telemedia industry. We talked about transport, we talked about software as a service, all those sorts of things. And I remember thinking at the time that obviously the telemedia industry, apart from being led by content and services that people want to buy, exists because there's all kinds of clever platforms in the background that actually allow that to happen. You need the tech. And as you know, I'm less excited about tech and more excited about the people side of things. And I certainly understood that the telemedia industry was perfectly positioned to take advantage of the AAS acronym and as a strategy, as a business model. But I did wonder whether or not it was going to become. I was, pleasantly surprised, but because by the time we got to the very first telemedia that we were able to run in Marbella, a full 2 years after, well, a few 2 years after the last one because of COVID, and it was very interesting to see the whole range of telemedia providers, not just from a content point of view or a platform point of view, but also a marketing point of view as well, adopting the as a service model. And I think that if we look at where we're at today, it's part of the fabric of the industry, right? In terms of whether
Mm.
you're talking about payments, whether you're talking about
Yeah.
software, whether you're talking about content delivery, whether you're even if you're talking about and marketing and content. So it really, it is interesting. I poo-pooed the acronym.
Mm.
And now, a mere 4 years later, it sort of underpins everything from a
Yeah.
platform point of view in our industry.
Yeah, totally entrenched in it, and everything could be run as a service off cloud-based servers, and I think that's sort of revolutionised, in this case messaging, but it has changed, everything. I think that's a really big shift we've seen.
But also,
Um,
I mean, how quick were our guys to adopt it?
oh, instant!
Lightning.
It was weeks, I think,
Yeah.
into lockdown where I first started to see stuff about guys on the telemedia side pushing the idea towards businesses that they could use WhatsApp, like the consumers they were trying to contact were using WhatsApp, and it took off from there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a rapid, and I think it showed just how adaptable this industry is, and where they see an opportunity, they go for it.
Yeah,
And I
no,
think in this, across the past 4 years, this has turned into something that's much more mainstream than it ever was in the past, which
well,
is,
I mean, I would agree with that. And I mean, I think, well, I mean, we'll talk about where we're going a little bit later on. But I mean, I think that, the other, part and parcel of that process has been that the telemedia industry has evolved into a crucial catalyst for successful mobile e-commerce, if you like.
mm,
And a lot of the reason for that is because it's been so quick to adopt some of the new technologies, some
yeah,
of the new strategies. Now, as you know, in the old days, premium rate billing, or DCB, which is as it evolved into, was, a very cool billing technology, which, had all the benefits of being seamless, being convenient, or, and we've been championing that for years, but it always seemed to be sort of this kind of little gem that was hidden in a corner and never really fulfilled its full potential. And part of our job, I suppose, before lockdown had always been to try and champion the benefits of DCB and start to try to get that into the mainstream. Now, if you go back to, the early episodes, we did start to see, firstly, DC being deployed into into areas where mobile technology was starting to supersede old technology. So things like transportation, bike rentals. We saw some
mm,
good stuff in Germany and that kind of thing. But I think also the other thing about it, and I'm sure we'll talk about content later, and as I mentioned earlier, that period of lockdown gave us and the industry and the consumers an opportunity to really explore the full potential of the mobile network as a media channel, as a marketing channel, as an entertainment channel. And of course, DCB underpins the success in many ways of some of those core, value-added services that have really helped boost the telemedia industry in the last 4 years and kept us on the air. So, we started to report on DCB success stories. The numbers kept getting bigger, the growth rates kept getting bigger. So, I mean, that was a really crucial part of the process, wasn't it, to start seeing
yeah.
DCB adopted and,
Well, it
dare I
was.
say it, becoming very much more mainstream.
It was absolutely, and I think sort of the lockdown. Well, aside from driving messaging, it drove up, as you say, a huge sort of use of mobile content because everyone was stuck at home. They had nothing to do. Lots of people who typically would have probably been doing other things were found themselves stuck at home with just a mobile phone, and so the content entertainment side of things rocketed, and as a result, carrier billing, I think, off the back of that did, because there was a lot of people who wanted an easy way to pay for snippets of entertainment. And what was interesting is one of the first stories we covered in our first ever podcast was some research by PM Connect, which said that by 2023, there would be 1.5 billion users of DCB, generating $28 billion in revenues globally. I think they possibly did the research before the full effect of lockdown came to pass. But in reality, looking at it, what actually happened is that according to both Markets and Research and Juniper Research, they both have very similar figures. That figure actually hits 70 billion. in 2023.
Wow.
So it was more than twice what was predicted by PM Connect. I mean, no disrespect to PM Connect. But at the time they did the research, they had no idea this was going to happen. But I think it really shows how that just exploded across lockdown, and it's probably the most significant thing I think that has happened in the 4 years since we've been doing this, is that carrier billing is huge, and it's everywhere. And part of that is because it can be attributed to marketing messages that were sent out in SMS and WhatsApp. It drove more traffic, but mainly it's down to the sort of content and entertainment business, and a lot of it in Africa and markets like that, which continue to grow and evolve.
Well, we'll talk about the future a little bit later,
Yes.
in the next segment. But I mean, I think the other really notable development during that lockdown period was the realization very quickly that because the demand for content went up, the consumers started to become far more selective about what it was that they were prepared to pay for, and the
Yeah.
industry very quickly responded to those market forces, and then all of a sudden I think we saw a very interesting uptick in terms of
Yeah.
content quality, and how it was the consumer that had to be put first. And then because it wasn't just as simple as putting out some of the older services, which I mean, again, we'll talk about the future a bit later on, but the comparisons are pretty stark. If you look at where we are now from a content point of view,
Yeah,
versus
totally.
where we were in 4 years' time, it's absolutely astonishing. Let's just finish up a little bit on the where we were, because obviously the other thing that has to be mentioned is inevitably, I suppose, because volumes were going up, because demand was going up, because the industry was now starting to balloon, I think, in that kind of post or during the COVID bubble and beyond. Of course, the incidents of fraud became far more prevalent than they had perhaps in the past, particularly across all aspects of the telemedia industry, and particularly because we were now in the old days, it was simply voice and a network issue, and then of course when we move into an online environment, there's all manner of different channels whereby fraud can bugger up the system. And so, it became quite clear that the likes of Avena, MCP, and Pello, to name but a few, other anti-fraud companies are available. And as we've always said, very grateful for those guys to be supportive of the industry. But fraud did kind of hit the headlines pretty quickly, didn't it, back then?
Yeah, well, as we were saying, it all sort of took off very rapidly around messaging and carrier billing and content, and then of course, sort of the fraud moved in, which it does. I think what's more notable is how quickly then the anti-fraud side of the business reacted to that, and the battle between, obviously the faster they fight it, the new frauds pop up and they fight it, but I feel the battle between the two has sort of narrowed somewhat. Frauds get sort of detected, closed down, and dealt with much more quickly. And I think that is testament to the size of the market now is so exciting that it's worth the investment in anti-fraud, and that the anti-fraud companies have really upped their game to an extraordinary extent to beat the fraudsters and do a great job. And of course, I think this brings us really to the one thing that we didn't talk about at all in 2020 that we talk about all the time now, and that's AI. And it's had an impact across everything, particularly content, particularly sort of marketing because of the data side of it. But it has a huge impact in fraud creation and fraud prevention. And I think companies like Avena in particular are doing some really astounding things with AI to spot the increasingly sophisticated and hard to find frauds. And I think it's down to that sort of level of commitment and that application of technology that this has really transformed our industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, on that, I would just like to give a shout out to our friends at NCP, because
Yes.
I noticed that this week, Smadex, who are one of the, I suppose, newer companies that have taken to promoting their services at World Telemedia, and anyone that wants to meet them can expect to see them again in Marbella this year on the 6th to the 8th of October. But they are joining MCP Insights Fighting Against Mobile Industry Fraud webinar, which is going to be held on the 11th of April at 5 p.m. CST. If you go to my LinkedIn feed, you'll see a link to it there, focusing on valuable insights presented in their latest white paper, Transparency and Brand Safe Advertising. And the panel will include Thomas Tinker, the head of AM at MCP, Rahima Odafel, who's the VP of Growth at Smadex, and the mighty Dario Betti, the CEO of MEF. So I try to make a note of that. 5 p.m. CEST, April the 11th, and that's Fighting Against Mobile Industry Fraud, hosted by MCP. So anyway,
interesting.
Back to
tune in. Yeah, no, but tuning into that, that's a good one. Yeah.
I like to do my research, mate. So you as we said earlier on, let's take a little bit of a view of the future. And I mean, you've already alluded to kind of the biggest, whereas 4 years ago, I don't think we were even thinking about AI and musing about CPaaS. 4 years now, CPaaS has become entrenched in the industry, and AI is everywhere, and that's all we're talking about at the moment. So I guess if we talk about the future, we talk about consumers continually demanding high quality value-added services and premium content. We continue to talk about how technology is improving the performance of not only the performance of anti-fraud, but also the performance of the kind of content offerings that companies are providing, and also the effectiveness of their marketing budgets in terms of ROI and that kind of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the future. I mean, you've got a note here that talks about mobile spend hitting 2.2 trillion. I like it.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to do was sort of, talk about sort of like we've talked about what we saw in 2020 and how it's changed sort of to 2024. I just thought we could look forward to where we might be sort of episode 100 to some degree. Okay. And I think part of that is this report that came out at the end of last week from Data AI about every decade they do a forecast of where the mobile sort of spend is going, and it was quite interesting this time because of the shift that's happened in their findings. In that it's growing, as it does each decade. It grows, by a similar amount. It's quite a sort of interesting insight. It was worth about 600 billion at the end of last decade period they looked at. They're forecasting by 2030, which will be the end of the next decade period they're looking at, will be 2.2 trillion. So, that's a lot of growth it's going. What's interesting is how that growth is being directed in terms of what people are spending on mobile. It's very specific, really, around kind of app spend, because that's what they look at. But I think it gives us a sort of a nice sort of idea of where consumer spending is in the ecosystem generally. And what's happening is that spending on games, which was always the sort of standout category on mobile, it's decreasing. And instead, currently, the spend and the projection up to 2030 is that the spending is going to be much more directed towards entertainment. So I think that's the sort of content and value-added services side of
everything other than
the business. That's everything other than games. So taking out sort of games is a very specific thing. Everything else that's sort of entertainment is going to see growth. Social media is also sort of separated out there. You could argue that's sort of entertainment, but social media is going to be the second biggest sort of growth area. But entertainment outstrips the growth in all the others dramatically, as the report shows. The link will be below, and people can read the story and click through to the actual report. But I think it's really interesting. But some of the things that are starting to appear as other growing areas are all these sort of interesting stuff like health and fitness and productivity tools is a surprisingly growth area. Not going to outstrip games, those two, but they are growing. And I think it shows that there has been this sort of change in what people want from their mobile phones. They want entertainment, and that means, as you said, really good, high quality content, which a shift has already happened towards that. But they're also wanting much more of these health and fitness. I mean, Julia from Seriously Fresh sort of talks a lot about, what kind of content sells really well, and she always harps back to health and fitness. Took off massively in lockdown, but has continued to be really important. And if you look sort of more widely at research around what Gen Z sort of do, and how they all go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and sort of,
Sober.
totally sober, and are constantly cleansing themselves. Um, that side of things, I think, is only going to grow. And so, I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I don't know where games really is going. We don't sort of specialize in games because it's such a sort of vast industry in its own right. But it's interesting. I think the growth in game spending is sort of slowing. But I suppose that does have a bearing on what we do, because a lot of carrier billing used to onboard people into games and things like that. But yes, it makes interesting reading how their view of the next, well, it's 2020 to 2030, so the next sort of 6 years is going to sort of be very different.
Yeah, well,
And
listen, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned our dear friend and telemedia sister, Julia
yeah,
DeMello, because in fact, again, if anyone wants to visit my my own LinkedIn feed, you'll see that I liked and reshared a video interview that you did actually with Julia in Barcelona at the 8.1 live event, which was excellent. If you missed it, you don't miss it next year. We're back again.
that was an excellent event. Yeah.
And in general, she's got a great take on, and Seriously Fresh Media have got a great take on how the content market works. And I guess that's inevitable when you've been, I don't know, doing it since you were 8 years old, because I think Seriously Fresh have been around for decades, haven't they?
Be careful where you go with that.
Anyway, there's a very good short interview with Julia, and there's other content that I know that you've put on the our brand new Telemedia online website, by the way. But she talked about how you can flip your content strategies now, and stop being reactive and start being much more proactive using all of the wonderful data that's available. And that she felt that it sounded as though the trend was more towards, sort of with that knowledge and with that sort of granular understanding of your consumer, that you can start to make content not only according to what they specifically want, but also according to your specific needs. And that could be engagement, it could be loyalty, could be straightforward ROI. And she talked about, the way that certain formats will affect that. And, if you haven't seen that interview, click on it. You'll be able to find Julia as well. She's an expert on all that kind of stuff. And, and again, on that, talking about where we were 4 years ago and where we are now, you look at companies like Cookies, you look at companies like Sound Media, they're all and some of the offerings out there for consumers using telemedia infrastructure, telemedia payments, telemedia marketing technology, and marketing strategies is absolutely astonishing. And I think that in no small part are we playing our part in making sure that when data AI start putting out big numbers, that we've done our bit to make sure those numbers are getting bigger. So I think the telemedia industry deserves a pat on the back for that. And that's my thing on content. So going back to where we're going, I noticed that so we've talked about how DCB has been part of this surge in entertainment that we've seen over the last couple of years. What's next? I remember I'm looking through as I say, we are a little bit off piece, so the agenda is a little bit more wishy-washy. One of the other things I have definitely noticed has been this sort of focus on emerging markets, and I think if you go back to 2020, though, we were talking about those emerging markets as though they were sort of, as the term would suggest, emerging. So one to watch, if you like, or ones to watch. And I think what we've really seen those emerging markets take hold and become far from being emerging markets and now being prime markets. I personally, for the purposes of this this vodcast, would highlight the explosion in terms of interest in MENA. And I noticed you've got a stat here that says 63 million users generating $800 million worth of business. That's obviously a good, big number. And I would also say that, again, looking through the activity on LinkedIn this week, if you're in any doubt that MENA was the place to be setting up your business, then I picked out two or three things that struck me. I want to say congratulations to Blazon, again, a regular at Telemedia, who celebrated their 8-year anniversary last week. I'll be seeing those guys in Dubai at the Telecom Middle East show. But 8 years, from very humble beginnings and now becoming a major player in that region. Go for Mobility posted Saudi Arabia market overview. Not the first overview on Saudi Arabia. I think we talked about someone else putting one out. I think maybe MTP a couple of weeks ago. So again, highlighting that that's a market brimming with potential. Cookies. Hello to Valentina and all her crew. They've made a strategic investment in MENA region and recognizing the immense potential, and they have set up their own established their own dedicated office in Dubai this week. So, I mean, if that isn't testament to the fact that that's where you need to be, that's where you need to be. And finally, I also noticed that you put out a very good Meet the People interview with Christina Nevrotova from our very good friends at Golden Goose, who also is, one of the whilst they're operating in 40 major MVAS markets, she also picked out the Middle East as being one of the countries, one of the regions that she felt was, offered the most substantial growth in mobile technology, and the biggest MVAS opportunity. So there, I mean, I know, as I say, I know Africa, I know South Africa, we're all big, but doesn't it seem to you that everyone's slightly obsessing about MENA, and perhaps
Well,
for
I think
good reason?
rightly so. I mean, it has seen phenomenal growth. I think it's sort of it's a market that sort of bloomed in the lockdown because it had the perfect sort of storm of a huge consumer base who were underserved with entertainment, who wanted entertainment, and a lot of them are unbanked. They use carrier billing. So, from a telemedia point of view, it ticks all the boxes. I think if you look at the data in this data AI report, the forecast through to 2030, it continues to be a growth market. So Asia is the biggest and continues to be the biggest, but growth wise, it's going to see only 5% growth between now and 2030. The Middle East sees nearly 11%, and Africa similarly sees almost 11%. So 10.7 and 10.8%. They're up there with amongst the biggest growth markets. They're bigger than Europe, which is only sort of going to grow by 10, only it's going to grow by 10%, which is ahead of North America, which is only 9%. But the ones that stand out really going forward are South America and Central America, which are seeing sort of 12, 13% projected growth in spend through mobile on iOS and Android. So that's basically on these sort of entertainment, games, healthcare, health and well-being, all that. So I think that, yes, these are really key markets in MENA. They'll continue to be so. I think there's a lot of untapped growth still there, but I think the one to start to watch going forward, we'll start to see a lot of our friends in the industry, I'd say in the next couple of years, starting to talk about South America and Central America. And while you're off doing Dubai, hopefully I shall be somewhere like Acapulco doing Central America.
So
because it'll be so important.
Yeah, World Telemedia
Yeah.
Miami or Cancun. I mean,
something like that, I think, yes.
As most of our clients will know, I mean, those regions are on our radar, and I think that we're not sitting here thinking that an event in Dubai or Cape Town or Cancun or Miami even would not be on our agenda. More a case of resources and time, but certainly, I agree with you, responding to where the market seems to be going and where the investment seems to be going and where the attention seems to be going. 100% those three areas, and as you mentioned, of course, Asia. But there is but one of us. I would also say to anyone, you might have heard Paul and I referencing data AI. We don't have a massively close relationship with those guys.
No.
really do put out some very detailed and some very excellent white papers and reports and data. And I would certainly urge everyone to check them out and get onto their sort of their news lists or whatever it is they do, because being informed is the key, I think, and that's what we try to do. And I think, Paul, I think we've probably covered everything, haven't we?
I think we've given due coverage to all the things. I think it's good. It's good. It's interesting to see how this has changed. I think it's an interesting time to take a look at where we started doing this and where the industry has gone in that time. And I think, thanks to this particular data AI report, just happened to coincidentally come out last week, we get an idea of where it might be going. So
and I think also thanks to Jerry for putting together that little montage at the beginning, because it did nothing but prove that in fact, I think we're getting younger.
I think so. Certainly growing into our good looks. I think.
Yeah, exactly. Before we go, I just would like to say hi and congratulations to Ansel Robertson, a great friend of ours who used to be at Sam Media, a regular on almost any panel that's worth its salt. She has just been appointed the program director and content and advertising supremo at MEF, and that was announced.
Wow.
Recently, so I would say a big win for the MEF there to get
Absolutely
on board. So we wish her well, and we look forward to seeing her at World Telemedia talking about MVAS DCB digital marketing, which is now going to be, her baby within MEF. So they mention it as being a niche corner of the telecoms world, and our job and our industry's job is to make it not a niche corner, but to make it mainstream. And hopefully in 2 weeks' time, we'll be able to give you another update on how much more mainstream the telemedia market is becoming. So, Paul, thanks very much, mate.
Well, thank you, mate.
Well, then, listen, thanks for the memories.
50 good ones.
50 good
ones.
Here's
to 50 more.
Here's to the next 50. All right, everyone. Thanks very much for listening, and we will be back in a couple of weeks' time. Cheers, Paul.
Cheers, mate. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.